Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm here today with Jonathan Biller, who's the Chief Legal Officer at Agios. And I'm looking forward to finding out a bit about your experiences, Jonathan, as a General Counsel within the life sciences at this particular juncture in time. But before I do jump into any of these questions, I'd love it, Jonathan, if you could introduce who you are and what it is that you do.
Sure. As you mentioned, I'm current since November of last year. I've been the chief legal officer at Agios. Before that, I'd had two other general counsel or chief legal officer roles. One in the industry immediately prior to Agios. I was at Celgene and was there for many years, and the last couple of years in the general counsel role. And then I was also a general counsel for a large publicly traded agricultural company, so outside the industry. And Agios is like Celgene, it's in the oncology space, although much smaller. It's a 12-year-old company. We've been fortunate enough to advance two products through approval, precision oncology medicines for acute myeloid leukemia. And we have for a company our size, a pretty robust clinical and preclinical pipeline, including our most advanced asset is a drug called mitapivat for non-malignant hematology indications, including sickle cell disease and thalassemia. So we have a lot going on. It's a wonderful culture, like many of the Cambridge biotech companies, putting patients first, and lots of positive energy and ambition and really smart people.
Yeah, definitely. I remember when we first connected, I think it was back in January, you'd only just moved from Celgene to Agios. And I think you were talking about how your role was very much more strategic role, one that was much more government facing and not so much an operational role, but really kind of looking at how you can build relationships and be that strategic partner to the entire life sciences business.
Yeah, it's, Celgene was much more mature, even though I was there for many years. When I got there, we were already a multi-billion-dollar company. And, there's a lot of infrastructure already. When you come to a smaller company, a lot of that's not there. So, you're deciding what to build. You're trying to learn from your past experiences. But I think you're right. I mean, from a legal perspective, or, really it's true of, I think, all the support organizations. You aspire to try to be a strategic partner, right? And not just be the reactive department where you get a call from your internal client and then you try to, solve the problem. And at least in my experience, as you and I had discussed, I think the ability to do that effectively starts with building, close personal connections, with your internal clients and colleagues at your company.
And how important do you think it is to move as a function from minimizers of risk, that department where things get sent to, and maybe a bit of a bottleneck, sometimes it's seen as a department, and moving towards those accelerators of opportunity, those strategic business partners to the future life sciences organizations? Why do you think that's so important?
Yeah, I think it's really important for a variety of reasons. One is, I think ultimately for the legal departments that do that well, you're adding value to the enterprise, right? Because, I think, lawyers tend to be, especially in biopharma where, it's an attractive industry. You're able to recruit very talented people, well-trained lawyers who've had experience, at other companies with law firms. They tend to be very good critical thinkers, very analytical. And if they've learned the business, they can add a lot of value, not just with respect to providing, a legal opinion. So there's a lot of value for the company. And then I just think personally and professionally and developmentally, for most lawyers, most people, the more you feel like you're part of making strategic decisions and you're being proactive and really a part of the business, the more enjoyable the job is. So I think being able to do that, it means you're going to be able to recruit better, retain better, develop, your colleagues better, and they'll just enjoy the job more.
What does that mean for the future of in-house legal if we're moving away from not necessarily just people with the legal expertise, but also now towards having that strategic acumen and that commercial acumen that's now needed?
Yeah, well, I think it's, you have to, when you're recruiting, when you're making decisions about, developing people internally, where you have choices. I think that becomes a big consideration. And I think, this will resonate with most lawyers who have a decent amount of experience in either law firms or in companies, that there are some lawyers, who are tremendously talented, and they can write an incredible opinion, they can dig in and they know it, but they're not necessarily comfortable doing what you need to do in-house, right? Which is sometimes, it's the 80-20 rule. You can't research something to death. You just have to be willing to, take some practical risks. You have to be willing to give your view, right? And that's one of the things that I've tried to do and I've preached, and I see some lawyers struggle with is, you wear two hats when you're in-house, right? You are the lawyer first, of course, and you got to make sure that the company is ethical, and you understand, what the compliance requirements are, and you're doing the right thing. That's always important. But there are going to be plenty of situations, whether you're evaluating a litigation risk or a business development risk, where I think you have to also take that hat off and be clear to your client. Like, this is what I would do. If it were my call as the business person, I understand the legal risk, and this is what I do, and I take the risk, or no, I wouldn't. I think, it's really not worth it. Understanding what we want to accomplish. And so that's something that, I think some lawyers and, business, it's not just lawyers, people, they can struggle with that, like having to really put themselves out there. But I think the more that they can do that, then you're perceived as, as part of the business. And, you do it in a way where you're never like, my answer is the only answers, but, there's alternatives here. There's always alternatives, but this is what I would recommend and why. And so anyway, I think that's an important characteristic, to be able to become that strategic partner.
What has been your own experience, both at Agios and Celgene, of course, very different organizations. What has been your own experience of accelerating and developing the business impact of your in-house team on the wider organization?
Well, I've been really lucky. When I was at Celgene, the first 7 years I was there, I was actually a very senior person in the finance organization, and worked with the legal team all the time. And when I moved into the GC role, we had a very well established, super talented team. So, one of the things for me to figure out just personally was, I now had a leadership team. By the way, I think almost all of them have gone on to be GCs, since the Bristol acquisition, who all in their areas were way more expert than I was ever going to be, right? So it's kind of like making sure, how do I facilitate, their ability to add value and understand the business. And I think a lot of that was just communication, right? I had a seat at the table at every board meeting and all the executive committee meetings. So while they had lots of information, it was making sure basically they knew what I knew, so they could give the best, most practical advice, in their areas, and then, help them on people issues and developing their team and, things like that. And similarly, while it's a much smaller company at Agios, I have to say, I moved in, and the senior team, is quite talented, and very experienced. So it really, for me, it's been a lot of the same things. You get to a point where you're kind of you're a jack of all trades and a master of none, right? Years and years ago, I had a specialty, and I would know more about that than anybody else in the room. And that's changed a lot. So it's just getting comfortable with, just, to me, it's about bringing out the best, in your team, and, facilitating the flow of information.
Definitely. And therefore, that quite neatly leads us on to my next question. How do you see the practice of in-house legal in life sciences changing in the years to come? Of course, we currently have the COVID crisis, and that will accelerate lots of change. But what does that change look like?
Yeah, I think there are some things that will always, I think, be constant, right? You have to be a good lawyer. You've got to have good judgment. You've got to understand the facts, right? It almost seems silly, but the facts matter, right? Because when you're applying the law to the facts, right? But you've got to know the business. So I do think that what you're seeing, and it's attracting people who are really interested in what life sciences companies do, whether it's a medical device company, a pharmaceutical company, et cetera. And so it's kind of, to some degree, self-selecting, people who are interested in that and really want to understand it. The same way I would add, right, biopharma companies, in our industry, they're made up of so many MDs and PhDs, right, who could have gone off and they could have been, practicing. I mean, some of ours do have, still maintain some, some practice, but for the most part, they're making that choice to go into, biopharma as researchers or in the clinical side, a regulatory, and so it's the same thing. It's because there's something about that, advancing medicines that could meet where there's significant unmet needs for patients, and that's incredibly gratifying. When you're lucky enough, work hard, smart enough, and then lucky enough to see approvals. So I think you'll just continue to see that, and I think with the technologies changing. I mean, if you think about like at every company, I'm sure this will resonate with every general counsel. Contracts, which are the building blocks of any business, right? And as you grow, there's like thousands and thousands of contracts that you have to, execute in a year. You never have 100% client satisfaction. Sometimes it's the other side, sometimes it's the client, sometimes your team could be doing something better, but it's never going to be perfect. But there's contract management systems and tools that are evolving every day where you can free up your team to do the more higher value work, because I think that's always been the challenge in-house, is how can you free up, your very good lawyers and your other professionals, paralegals and others who are, you've hired, who you really believe in and they're great, free them up to do the work that adds the most value, right? So that they can do that. And I think, that will continue taking advantage of tools like that. It's a challenge when you're smaller, because it's like, going from the Rolodex to your iPhone, right? Like once you get all of your contacts in your iPhone, it's super easy, right? But there's an investment of time that you have to make. And I think what happens when you're small, and scrappy, and you're still relying on the public markets for capital, you don't necessarily have the internal bandwidth, right, to make that investment, to get there. And so those things can kind of take longer, to do. But that will, I think that you'll continue to see that evolution. How to work with law firms. I was in the big law firm world for many years, and that's an evolving thing. How to really partner with them, not just efficiently from an economic perspective, so you're not paying more than you need to, but also acknowledging the value that's being given. But to make sure, again, it's like communication, that firm really understands your business, the firms that you're working with, and they can be proactive to some degree too, and not just, reactive.
Yeah, there's such a huge piece on that elevation of the in-house legal team, be that through CMS software, and be that through using or outsourcing the legal work, and allowing and freeing up your own BD lawyers to do those high risk, high ticket items. Definitely. So as we now kind of approach the well, as we're still very much in the midst of COVID, where do you see the opportunity? Where do you see the positives and the outcomes from the current situation that might allow you to do things differently, that might accelerate change?
Yeah, so it's been really interesting, our experience at Agios. I would say that it's been pretty remarkable that I don't think we've had anything as a company that we haven't been able to get done, or even really that's been delayed because of the impact of COVID on how we operate as a company. We've obviously had some delays to clinical trials, like everybody has had, particularly, for healthy volunteers, right? That was, appropriately made not a priority at at all of our, the sites that were just dealing with COVID and other things during these last 6 months. But part of that goes back to what I said before, because we are a hyper connected company. So having strong personal relationships makes this kind of communication that much more, seamless, I think, and easy. I think, and so that's led to like one, I think, big upside potentially is, reimagining like how we work, like how much do we really need to all be in the office at the same time? And, every company's going through those conversations. I can say at Agios, there's a pretty remarkable unanimity among the leadership team that we want to maximize flexibility for our teams. And I think that provides a lot of benefits, with the one caveat being, what are the guidelines we're going to want to have to make sure that we have sufficient in-person time to maintain our culture and onboard people, right? Because you go back to, if you're connected, it works better. If you're not connected, how do you do that? And so, there's lots of interesting conversations that are going on. But for lawyers, for legal teams, really for everybody, I think the big benefit is, you're not necessarily limited geographically ultimately to where you work, right? So, if you have, I've had so many experiences in my career where you have a talented colleague and, their husband or their wife or their partner gets a great opportunity, in a city that's a 6-hour drive away, right? And so all of a sudden that means they have, they're leaving their job to support their partner or their spouse, and you've lost that person, right? Well, now I think we live in a world where, there's a pretty good chance that you wouldn't have to lose that person, right? And we've seen that we can work, effectively this way. And even just commuting time. I mean, it's interesting at Agios on my team, there's a real range of people. I would say about a third of the team has found this to be amazing personally, right? They still have their jobs. They don't have an out. Cambridge is a crazy, lots of traffic. Their hour-and-a-half commute is gone. Yeah. They're way more productive. And we've done things like we have twice a week, kind of what we could call like open office hours, where we use WebEx, but it could be Zoom or Teams or whatever, where it's totally optional. Like you just show up if you want to show up, and it's really not about work. It's just about connecting and gabbing and talking. And so, some of those folks feel like they are as or more connected. They see their colleagues even more because they like to take advantage of that than when they were in the office and they don't have the commute. And so, their view is, hey, I'll come in when I need to come in. We're onboarding a new colleague, or it's really important to meet with our internal client, face to face. But other than that, I just want to work from home. And then we have, half of Agios has school-age children. And so, we have some folks who they like to be in the office, and then they've got kids, at home, and they're like, when can I get back to the office? Please. Because, we're at a place where it's just basically our lab employees. We're not, we're mindful of, not wanting to put a burden on the healthcare system, and just make sure that, and with all the protocols we have in the office, it eliminates some of the benefit you get normal times of being in the office anyway. So, so I'd say the big advantage is reimagining work, and, where you can recruit from, what flexibility that people can have in their personal lives and still, deliver high quality work.
And speaking of reimagining work, how have you personally, over the past 6-7 months, how have you personally managed to stay motivated in this period?
Yeah, I feel incredibly blessed because, I'm mindful of, and I think many of my colleagues are, so much of the world, the country and the world, they've had their work fundamentally disrupted. People have lost their jobs. They're struggling. And I think in the life sciences industry, we're blessed, right? Because, there's been relatively few layoffs, and in the company, and in our company, we haven't had any, direct financial, implications, to date from the pandemic. And so we all have these jobs, like still doing this fantastic work with great people, right? And it's a distraction from what's going on, from the pandemic, politically, whatever it is. So we feel really lucky. So motivation's not been an issue. I mean, I miss a little bit getting that energy in person. I like to be with people, but at the same time, I've had way more time with my, 11, almost 12-year-old daughter, and my wife. So it's, there's been a lot of positives too. But for me personally, I think what I've seen is when I signed on with Agios, for personal reasons, I was not going to move my family to Cambridge. So the discussion was around, in my plan, that's what I was doing the first few months, was, trying to be there every week, call it like 3 or 4 days. And I think what I've found is that when we go back and we have that flexibility, I think I could easily see, well, it'll be every other week, probably. I won't need to be there every week. And that would be the optimal balance for me to get the energy from my wonderful colleagues, and also feel like I'm visible enough and I'm there, but doing that every other week versus every week, I don't think I'll lose anything on those important metrics, and have an even better work-life balance, at least in terms of where I'm located.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. I thought I'd end it on a personal note, and I'm sure many people will be able to relate. I really appreciate your time and insight today in joining me for this interview. So thank you so much.
Sure, my pleasure. My pleasure. Take care. See ya.
Cheers. Thanks.